I think of this week as the Yigal Yanai Memorial. Yigal Yanai was the director of the Hebrew department at UCLA. He was my Hebrew instructor for the second of my 2 years there. They had some generic Israeli teaching Hebrew 1, but Hebrew 101 and 102 and 103 I took with Yigal Yanai. And he engaged us with vocalized Hebrew biblical text, specifically this week's portion. It's the Yigal Yanai Memorial because I owe Yigal Yanai a favor that when I arrived in Jerusalem after graduation from UCLA, they told me, go up to the second floor in room 202, you'll check with the head of the department and he'll evaluate your Hebrew reading and conversational ability to determine which lemon you should be in. It turns out that the head of the Hebrew department at the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem was Yigal Yanai, who bailed from UCLA and followed me like a bad penny. And I profoundly disappointed Dr. Yanai because he figured I was one of his students in second year Hebrew. I should be testing out in Kita Dalet. But I only tested out in Gimel Shtayim because I was an English major. I didn't apply myself enough to Hebrew. I was struggling through a seminar I hated, an elective in restoration drama. I don't really care about the English restoration, and I hate reading plays, so it was a struggle. Anyway, so my penance is I dedicate this Parashat Vayeshev every year to Dr. Yanai because he threw us in feet first with Genesis 37. Carol was reminding me this week. It was the great German novelist Thomas Mann who wrote 5 novels on the theme of Joseph and his family and his brothers and his traumas and adventures in Egypt. And having finished the 5th, Mann shrugged and said, God did it better in Genesis. And speaking as a UCLA literature student doing advanced level of Hebrew, I'll have to agree with Thomas Mann because it's Genesis 37 that hooked me on Torah study and Torah teaching and persuaded me to push me over the top to be a rabbi. But here's the dilemma. Just this one chapter. Forget the fact that the last 13 chapters of Genesis, the earliest novel in recorded literary history, the story of Joseph and how he ends up being in Egypt, how he brings his family down to Egypt, leaving us ensconced there, literally as the mise en scène. I use lots of French vocabulary to honor Sandra, to put us in position for the ensuing book of Exodus and the drama of the birth of Jewish people. So the story of Joseph is profoundly important, but here's the problem. Just as our Christian neighbors this time of year try to get kids excited about Christmas by talking about what Santa is bringing you and make it about presents and treats. And we Jews do the same, unequivocally, with so many of our holidays, making Passover about who gets to find the afikomen. On the same basis, we have to acculturate our children to the stories of our people, the legacy and heritage of Israel, by teaching them the story of Joseph and his brothers. How his brothers were envious because dad gave him some favors they didn't have, so they beat him up and they sold him into slavery. To which we always say, don't try this at home, boys and girls. And then he ends up having these strange dreams and interpreting other people's dreams, and he rises to a position of power, and eventually his brothers come to Egypt, and we all know the story as a story. Or for the Latin scholars, qua story. But here's the thing. If it were only story, if it were only literature, which I as an undergraduate student in literature saw and appreciated, it would not have endured 4,000 years. Because it's not about Joseph and his brothers. It's about the household of Israel being configured to be slaves in Egypt as God had told their great-grandfather Abraham they would be. Back in Genesis 15, God told Abraham, your descendants will be slaves in a foreign country for 400 years. And eventually, I will punish the people that enslaved them and bring them out with great substance and wealth and bring them home to this land that I promised, but not yet. Kino shalem avon ha'amori. Literally, for the sin of the Amorite is not yet complete. Conceptually, it's not your turn yet. The 7 nations of the Canaanites will continue to build up a critical mass of corruption and poison the earth by their sin, their idolatry, their child sacrifice. And eventually the land will vomit them out, and then it will be your turn. The story of Joseph and his brothers only sets the stage for the fact that things happen in God's own good time, which is a phenomenon that we, particularly we Americans, we're very impatient, find hard to accept. Historian Otto Bettmann points out that Europeans were horrified back in the 1880s and 90s when they traveled across the United States by train, and they found the train was stopping for a dinner break, and they were allowed 5 minutes. Can you imagine a Frenchman taking 5 minutes to eat a meal? It takes them a lot longer to read the menu. We are an impulsive, hurry-up nation of impulsive, hurry-up people, and American Jews want it now. Like that nasty girl in Willy Wonka. No, Daddy, I want redemption now. The message of Joseph and his brothers, the narrative, the novel that begins in this week's Torah portion, is that there is a mechanism by which God's plans are carried out, and we have the privilege of being a part. And sometimes an unhappy part. Jacob's 10 oldest sons are not happy that Joseph gets all the favor. And Joseph, being 17, enough said, snot-nosed, egotistical adolescent, is totally happy to be wearing his katonet pasim, his management suit, while his brothers are running around in their ratty labor clothes. And worse, when he starts having dreams that he will eventually be favored over them and will bring blessing and that they will bow down to him. Because he's 17, he doesn't keep it to himself. He says, hey, guess what, guys? I had a dream. The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars, mishtachavim li, were bowing down to me. So this is the one thrust of the Joseph story that makes it so infinitely much more than a story, a simple kiddie narrative that we need to, yes, acculturate the kids to so they can grow into it and realize how big it is. That even the sibling rivalry, the enmity and the resentment and the smugness and cluelessness, which we should relate to, having all of us been kids, is designed to bring it home and make it human and accessible at an immediate level. At the same time that it highlights the vastness of how God's plan works out with little wheels within wheels, engaging and turning things forward to fulfill our destiny in the fullness of God's time. That's the one glorious dynamic in this story that we miss if we view it just as a story. Shakespeare says what's past is prologue. Well, this is our very long ago past, and it is indeed the prologue, the preamble of our coming into Egypt to be in the fullness of God's time, redeemed from Egypt. But there's another huge message, much more immediate, if you will, from the story of Joseph, and that is this. Go back a couple chapters to what our Saturday morning Torah students know I call the Great Baby Derby. Jacob is crazy in love with his beautiful cousin Rachel, slaves for 7 years as a bride gift to his uncle for the privilege of marrying her. At the end of 7 years, they make a feast, they take him off to bed, and turns out in the morning the bride that was there was not his beloved young cousin Rachel, but her older sister Leah. So he has been, as the late John F. Kennedy loved to say, shafted. So he does a week of feasting for his bride. They have another wedding, and he works for another 7 years for his uncle, then 6 more beyond to get his share of the flock. All of this juggling. And in the meantime, the 2 women are competing for his attention. You'll remember when, Stan read us on Yom Kippur, I forget who read the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah, the story of Hannah, who was infertile. And it actually uses the word tsarata to refer to her co-wife. Tsarata, her tsuris, her opponent, her rival. Because in a polygynous society, the women are not all partners, they're competing. Well, the same dynamic applies here, and Rachel, who's infertile, the desired wife, but infertile, finds that he's starting to spend a lot more time with Leah, her big sister, because he wants to be a patriarch, and she's cranking out kids as fast as the episiotomy heals. So she proposes, take Bilhah, my body servant, to be a surrogate mother for me. So he conceives one child after another, 2 in a row, with Bilhah. Not to be outdone, Leah says, take my body servant, Zilpah, and let her be surrogate mother for me, because having birthed 4, I've stopped. And so, of the 12 tribes, Leah is the mother of 6. Eventually, Rachel is the mother of 2 and dies giving birth to the younger. But Bilhah and Zilpah each have one. The pecking order in the hierarchy of the society and of the household is the one mother is more valued than the other, and the 2 other mothers are only slaves who are not really but concubines or surrogate and partial mothers. The 4 women have different status, and so do their respective sons, in the family order, in the household of Jacob, let alone in the subsequent geopolitics of the 12 tribes. But here is what's totally awesome about it. By your standards and my standards and Carol's standards as a mental health professional, as a social scientist, they are half-siblings to each other. Leah's 6, and the 2 each to Bilhah, Zilpah, and Rachel, they are half-siblings to another, sharing a common father. But 4 different mothers. Half-siblings from the viewpoint of law, from the viewpoint of all the social sciences. When Rachel, his mother, dies, giving birth to his baby brother Benjamin, who's so cherished and precious to him, which is why, when we learn the story as kiddies, he's so concerned about and missing Benjamin, because Benjamin is his one full-blood brother. He's going to think of his mother's sister, Leah, as his aunt. Or, if you will, aunt, depending on what part of the country you're from. And here is the marvelous message of the story. There is no term in biblical Hebrew for half-blood kin. There is no term in biblical Hebrew for stepmother, wicked or otherwise. And if Joseph is bossing around his 10 big brothers, because what do they care? They all come from different moms than him. When he rubs everyone's nose in the second big dream, hey, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bow down to me, Jacob rebukes him. Rebukes him with a rebuke and says, will your mother and your brothers and I then have to defer and bow down to you? Friends, this is a throwaway detail in half a verse in chapter 37. But it sets the tone for Jewish life for the next 4,000 years. Only in our self-hatred are we stupid enough when you meet another Jew to say, oh, really? You're a rabbi? What kind? Oh, you're Jewish? What kind of synagogue do you belong to? If you belong to a synagogue. I belong to a synagogue. We want to label each other. We want to compartmentalize each other. We want to pigeonhole each other, thinking because we can label each other, we understand each other. This is a travesty and a violation of the principle established by our forebear, Jacob/Israel, for whom our household of Israel is named. When he refers to Joseph's aunt, Leah, as your mother, when he refers to Joseph's array of half-siblings as your brothers, we integrate that so thoroughly that when we're little kids in school learning Bible stories, because we're not grown up enough for Torah study with Dr. Yanai, without even thinking of the implications, we tell the story of Joseph, say it with me, and his brothers. It may feel like an evangelical country church to refer to each other as brothers and sisters. But that's what our liturgy says. Islam adopted that from Judaism, and they refer to their co-religionists as brothers and sisters. And in the black churches, they do the same. Yatzlichenu Adonai Bor'enu. ביחד עם כל אחינו ואחיותינו בני ישראל. May our Maker and covenant partner bring every blessing as we prepare for this feast of rededication coming this weekend. Bring every success and happiness and prosperity and joy and peace to all of our brothers and sisters, the household of Israel. And let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom.